So I'm going to show you how to do a rhetorical analysis using a text. And I'm just going to walk you through a few things with Robert F. Kennedy's assassination, or speech about the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. So if you watch the video that I posted of Robert Kennedy giving the speech, you would know that he was on his way to a rally for his presidential campaign when he found out that Martin Luther King had died. And he felt like he needed to tell the audience what was happening. So the audience had no idea Martin Luther King had died. He was minutes away from walking out of the car, getting out of the car, and jumping onto the back of a pickup truck to give this speech. He did not have time to write it down. He did not have time to make real deep notes. Instead, he actually just made this speech off the top of his head on the fly. And the reason why it's one of the most remarkable speeches is because he did it so naturally. And so we're going to continue to think about ethos, pathos, and logos. And we want to think with his ethos, why are these people listening to him? Okay, so why? Well, first of all, they support his presidential campaign because that's why they're there at the rally. Second, he was the Attorney General of the United States. He was John F. Kennedy's brother. People genuinely wanted to listen to him because he was a forward thinker and a mover in the civil rights movement. So we see that his ethos is credible because of his political position, who his family was, and that's why the people wanted to listen to him. So we think about the logos that he is going to use we want to look at any kind of logical statements that he's going to make. And then we want to look at pathos. And with pathos, we want to look at any kind of emotion, but also we want to look at how or why or how he uses literary terms to make things more emotional, to make the audience feel what he's trying to say. So we're going to read through this together, and I'm going to point out a few things, and this is going to kind of help you complete the assignment of the Ronald Reagan speech. So let's start with paragraph 1. I'm only going to talk to you for a minute or so this evening because I have some very sad news for all of you. Could you lower those signs, please? So remember here that he is at a campaign rally for himself, and he has basically told them, we're not here to campaign. I'm here to tell you something else. I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. So let's think about why he included the specific statements that he was shot and he was killed. So he's trying to provide some concrete information, some logical information to the crowd so there won't be assumptions. If he said Martin Luther King died, that leaves things open for interpretation. People start having rumors. People start saying, well, this happened. No, this happened. But he clearly gives them the logical, this is what happened. He was shot and he was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of nation we are and what kind of direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. So I think this is an interesting sentence here because he is giving them an option. So logic would tell us that they could be filled with these emotions, okay? They could be filled with this pathos, or they could move in a different direction. We can move in that direction as a country in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and to replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, with an effort to understand compassion and love. So if we look here at this phrase, stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, that's what we call figurative language. And figurative language generally makes us feel something or think of something, okay? So this stain of bloodshed here that spread across our land, he is making an allusion to the deaths, the riots, the physical pain, the slaughters that people have had to endure because of racism And so he's using figurative language to incite pathos. For those of you who are black and are tempted to fill with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. So let's think about this phrase. I firmly believe that when you are listening to someone speak, hearing what they're not saying is as important as what they are saying. So when a person controls their message, that is incredibly important part of a message. So I had a member of my family killed. Well, we know who he's talking about. He's talking about JFK. But why doesn't he say, well, you might have heard about my brother, the president, who was assassinated, and he was killed by a white man? He doesn't say, okay, well, you've all heard about the president that died. Well, that was my brother. Instead, he just says, a member of my family. And I think that he is building very credible ethos here because he's not making this speech about him. He's making this speech about Martin Luther King. And he moves into, but we have to make this effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poet was Aeschylus. He once wrote, even in our sleep, pain which we cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart until in our own despair against our will comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. This is what we call an allusion. And he is making an allusion to a poem that he finds inspiring. And so he's talking about an emotional pain. Generally, allusions are making us think about something in the past to move us. Okay, so pain which we cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart until in our own despair against our will comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. When we think about the word awful here, he's not talking it in terms of bad. He's thinking of it as full of awe, because the real definition of awful is full of awe. You do not have a response. You're so full of shock. And so he's talking about how we have this pain, but we also are full of God's grace. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. So here he uses a technique called anaphora. So he says what we need, what we need, what we need, and that is called anaphora. An anaphora is a repetition for emphasis, and that's to make your point, okay? So he's trying to make a point that in the United States we need to move forward. We can't let this be the one thing that stops us in our progress. So I ask you tonight to return home to say a prayer for the family of Martin Luther King. Yes, it's true, but more importantly, say a prayer for our own country, which all of us love, a prayer for understanding and that compassion of which I spoke. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness. It's not the end of disorder. Again, he's using anaphora for emphasis. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And let's dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago. Again, we have ourselves an allusion. To tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. So what is the savageness of man? What does that even mean? So men, women, the human race is naturally animalistic. That we have animalistic tendencies. And when we feel threatened, our body has an animalistic response to react in a certain way. But we have to tame that. We have to tame it to the point where we won't respond in anger and violence. And so we want to make gentle the life of this world. So he's using that allusion here to make you feel emotion. And so this is just a simple analysis that I wanted to show you how you walk through a piece and start figuring out what these things mean. And so when you do your assignment, you are actually going to be looking at what we call the soapstone. And if you will follow the directions online, you'll see what you will be looking for, okay? Because we'll move into a deeper understanding of analysis as we move forward in this unit.